I would like to thank the technical committee for approving this work and also the organizing committee for allowing its presentation at such an important international event. The work is entitled, "Why Are the Results of the AHP Not Binding for the Valuation of Real Estate?" which is part of the line of research carried out by the Venezuelan author who is currently based in Spain. For the purposes of developing the work, we begin with the verification method. Reduction to absurdity, or reductio ad absurdum, is a technique of argumentation and demonstration used to establish the truth of a proposition or situation by showing that assuming the opposite leads to a contradiction or an absurd result. It can be applied in various fields, mainly in logic, mathematics, philosophy, and science, but also in everyday situations and legal argumentation. It consists of temporarily assuming the opposite of what one wants to prove, and then demonstrating that this assumption leads to a contradiction or an absurd result. This implies that the initial assumption is false. Therefore, the original statement must be true. The established procedure follows these steps. We start from the hypothesis that we want to prove. The opposite of this hypothesis is assumed, negation. A logical reasoning develops from this negation. You reach a contradiction or an absurd result. It is concluded that the negation is false, so the original or initial hypothesis is true. The initiation of research based on the method of reduction to absurdity begins with the definition of the hypotheses. Initial hypothesis, original. The results of the general weighting vector of the AHP are not linked to real estate market prices. Alternative hypothesis, contrary. The results of the general weighting vector of the AHP are linked to real estate market prices. This research work is based on the content of the real fable of AHP and real estate valuation, which is part of the book The Fabulous Appraisal of a Medieval Castle by the author of this presentation. The main characters of the fable are the magnanimous king, the wise analytical, the wise regressor, the noble seller, and the appraiser reel. From the narration of the real fable. One day, a European king decided to gift his crown prince a new castle, complete with every luxury and comfort. Using web scraping on royal real estate portals, he compiled a small database, a sample of 5 properties based on 3 characteristics: quality of the environment, quality of the castle, and state of conservation. The other characteristics of the reference properties were quite similar. He was also firm in reviewing the offered prices. Now, which castle to buy? It was a decision that had to be made quickly, as there was a high demand for medieval castles on the market, and the selected properties could sell rapidly. A nobleman, hearing of the royal intentions, decided to offer his castle, henceforth referred to as Castle N, built on a 15,000 hectare plot with a construction area of 1,500 square meters, which was not for sale at the time. However, there was a problem. He hadn't considered the selling price. Interested as he was, the king asked the standard and formal question as in any negotiation: what is the price of his castle? Quickly, the nobleman stated that he did not know, adding that the emotional value is very high as his debts, so he tells His Majesty to estimate the price of the castle to make the best decision to the satisfaction of the parties. The negotiation would be done with all certainty. Noble word of honor. The noble seller finished arguing. "Very well," exclaimed the king, making a vengeance to the noble seller. "In my court there is a appraiser reel who will be able to correctly estimate the value, that is, the most probable price of your castle." Indeed, he summoned the appraiser reel, who immediately accepted the commission to carry out the valuation work. Via email, the king sends the market sample to the appraiser to perform the calculations and determine the market value of Castle N following international valuation standards for castles. In this table, you can find the information provided by His Majesty. It is important to remember the characteristics of the properties that the king had considered when selecting the sample, so the appraiser must consider them in his valuation work. Otherwise, it would cause a displeasure to the king, since his opinion as a businessman is very respected worldwide, especially when starting the study for the choice of the property as a family investment. The appraiser, a market man, had no doubts about which method to apply, the market comparison method, but due to the size of the sample, although he knew that there was much more information available, it was not possible to apply scientific treatments to explain real estate prices. The deadline was 2 days, and he wondered what to do. It was then that he remembered a proposal brought from Europe to America, based on the use of a valuation ratio using the elements of the global vector of the alternatives of the analytic hierarchy process, AHP. From the analytical hierarchy process, AHP, the analytic hierarchy process, AHP, is a multi-criteria decision-making technique proposed by Thomas Sadie, 1977-1980, classified within the multiple attribute decision-making MAD-M methods, which combines tangible and intangible aspects to obtain on a ratio scale the priorities associated with the problem alternatives. The main characteristics of this approach are the modeling of the problem through a hierarchical structure, the use of pairwise comparisons to incorporate decision-maker preferences, and the obtaining of a ratio scale that is valid for complex decision-making. In this table by Ishizaka and Nemery is a classification by type of decision problem and the type of method associated with its solution. It can be seen that AHP is mainly used for selection and categorization problems. From the solution using analytic hierarchy process, AHP, the appraiser real considers this hierarchical scheme based on the goal, which is the selection of the property, the criteria such as quality of the environment, quality of the castle and state of conservation, being the alternatives the castles from 1 to 5 complementing castle N. For the latter, it is necessary to determine its market price. In this first table is the reciprocal matrix of pairwise comparison by criteria and priority vector, which was completed by the opinion of a group of appraisers of the kingdom based on Sadie's fundamental table. The consistency ratio check is included. These 3 tables present the reciprocal pairwise comparison matrices of the alternatives and the standardized priority vector for quality of the environment, quality of the castle and state of conservation. The table shows the results of the normalized priority vector by alternatives, the criteria priority vector, the global vector, and the ranking. As can be seen, Castle 5 obtained the highest value among the elements of the normalized global vector, 0.3443, being number 1 in the ranking. As for Castle N, with a value of 0.1066, it occupied the 5th position in the selection process. If a decision had to be made, the Castle 5 option should be considered, but this would not necessarily be definitive because the benefits, costs, opportunities, and risks would have to be analyzed for the final decision. Up to this point, the AHP has been correctly applied in its original form and for which it was idealized in the 1970s by its author. And today, almost 50 years later, it continues to be studied by the scientific community as an alternative to empirically support complex decision-making. What is the price of Castle N? The procedure used by the actual appraiser is based on the valuation ratio, which is a mathematical artifice to determine the value of the property, in this case, Castle N. The valuation ratio equation is based on the quotient of the sum of the prices of the comparables over the sum of the weights of the comparable properties. The value of the property is equal to the valuation ratio times the weighting of the property being appraised, in this case, Castle N. In this table are the results for determining the unit value of Castle N based on the valuation ratio. It is important that the sum of the weights of the comparable properties plus the subject property is equal to 1. In this other table is the information on the total value of Castle N resulting from multiplying the building area by the unit value rounded up to a total of 1,725,000 monetary units. The appraiser exclaimed, "How marvelous! How quickly I was able to make the calculations! Now to prepare the royal report to be presented to His Highness for him to make the best decision." The king receives him in his royal office, and indeed he hands him the corresponding report. His Majesty reads it carefully and states that the price seems reasonable to him, but again he is struck by the fact that Castle 5, the one with the best ranking, was the one with the highest unit price among the bids. Castle 2 is no longer for sale. While the appraiser was doing other work, the king continued to check the market daily in case another interesting offer appeared. He had noticed that Castle 2 was no longer for sale, so he wrote a message to the appraiser asking him to make the calculations again without considering the property, to analyze what effect it might have on the selection of the alternative, and how it might affect the price of the appraisable property. Again, the appraiser consulted with his appraiser friends. They generated the pairwise comparisons considering the new alternative for the reciprocal matrix of the alternatives by criteria, obtaining the following results. Once the pairwise comparison matrices of the criteria and of the alternatives by criteria are determined, the table with the results for the normalized priority vector by alternatives, the priority vector of the criteria, the global vector, and the ranking is presented. In this other table is the result for the unit value of Castle N, while in this other table is the calculation of the total value for Castle N of 1,455,000 monetary units. The appraiser noted that the difference in value of the appraisable property between the solution when Castle 2 was present and without considering Castle 2 was minus 270,000.00 that is minus 15.65%. So he reflected and asked himself, being the king such an expert in business, will this result make him happy as an investor? Anyway, he put the report together and took it back to the king. "Leave Castle 2 and take out Castle 4. The king, upon seeing the results, exclaimed, "If we interpret the results, Castle 2, which was ranked number 6 in the initial ranking and with the lowest unit price, influenced Castle N to have a lower unit value, why this change? Could you be so kind, my dear and noble appraiser, in reviewing the calculations, but not only the ones you already made, but also analyze other cases such as leaving alternative 2 and not considering alternative 4. Also, as I got another offer, I want you to include it with all the others, get the results, and we analyze them together." Once the pairwise comparison matrices of the criteria and of the alternatives by criteria have been determined, a table is presented with the results for the normalized priority vector by alternatives, the priority vector of the criteria, the global vector, and the ranking. In this other table is the result for the unit value of Castle N, while in this other table is the calculation of the total value for Castle N of 1,800,000 monetary units. The appraiser observes that the unit value is similar to that obtained with all the comparables, but does not dare to draw conclusions until the other case, considering one more alternative, Castle 6 with a land area of 25 hectares, construction area of 1,000 square meters, and a total price of 3 million monetary units. Include a new offer, the Castle 6. Once the pairwise comparison matrices of the criteria and of the alternatives by criteria have been determined, a table is presented with the results for the normalized priority vector by alternatives, the priority vector of the criteria, the global vector, and the ranking. In this other table is the result for the unit value of Castle N, while in this other table is the calculation of the total value for Castle N of 1,980,000 monetary units. From the comparison of results, the comparative table of the rankings by cases is presented. Although in the first cases the general position of the alternatives is maintained, being Castle 5 the highest priority in all cases, For the case of the 7 alternatives, there is an inversion of rank among the other alternatives. For example, Castle 1 was the third option for the first 2 cases, then moved to second place for the following 2 cases. As for Castle N, it occupied the following positions 5 out of 6, 5 out of 5, 4 out of 5, and 6 out of 7. So there is no manifest rank inversion. The comparative table for the unit and total values per case is also presented. As can be seen, the average total value of the cases analyzed is 1,740,000.00 with a value range between 1,455,000.00 and 1,980,000.00 with a percentage difference between the highest value and the lowest value, based on the lowest of plus 36.08%. Once again, the royal appraiser went to the royal castle to talk to His Highness, and to present the results of the task entrusted to him. When the king saw the results, he wondered why there was so much variation between the highest value and the lowest value, and asked what could be the causes of this inaccuracy. Not having a satisfactory answer from the royal appraiser, he suggested to perform a simple adjustment test called Non-Ratio Reciprocity Test, NRRT. The Non-Ratio Reciprocity Test, NRRT, consists of calculating the percentage difference between the estimated value using the valuation ratio and the offered price of the comparable properties, with the following equation. As can be seen, the calculated value is 2,007.09 monetary units per square meter, while the bid price is 1,650.00 monetary units per square meter, generating an increase of 22% with respect to the initial price. This is how all the calculations were made for all the cases and all the castles. The appraiser was surprised with the results and decided to meet with his colleagues before presenting them to the king. In an interesting discussion, it was possible to conclude the following about the contents of this table. A. In all cases, all the values of the castles were very different, especially Castle 2, which with a price of 1,200.00 mu per square meter, the values are between 382.98 and 422.99 monetary units per square meter, with a maximum NRRT of minus 68%. B. For Castle N, it is observed that it went from a minimum of 969.40 monetary units per square meter to a maximum of 1,192.61 mu per square meter, a 23% variation with respect to the lowest value. C. When a castle is removed, positive and negative NRRTs are observed, so that there is underestimation and overestimation of the initial prices. D. For the case of the 6 alternatives, there are radical changes in the estimated values, reflected in the high NRRT percentages. E. The valuation ratio is different in all cases. Once the report was presented, the king made an even more conservative reading of the report, and with the serenity that characterized him, knowing that it was not his specialty, he considered based on the results that there is no reliability, no consistency, and much less reciprocity in the prices used for the calculations and the values determined. In this regard, I consider it necessary to consult with the wise analytical of his realm. The wise analytical argues, "We are in the presence of 2 very different procedures with different objectives. In the first one, we are trying to solve a problem of P-alpha selection, and the second one, the valuation of the castle with the mathematically determined values which are adimensional, which are directly linked to the measurement of the criteria and the alternatives in the hierarchical levels considered. Therefore, they are not binding for the exchange of information with other measurements or indicators of the real estate market, which has a very different behavior and which must be analyzed separately." To verify the non-linkage, let us do an exercise considering the judgments of the king, the valuator real, the wise analytic, and the also invited, the wise regressor. But this time we will consider the characteristics: strength, security, and access to the castles. In this first table, there is the reciprocal matrix of pairwise comparison by the criteria and the priority vector, which was completed by the opinion of the king of the wise men of the kingdom, based on the fundamental table of Sati. The check of the consistency ratio is included. These three tables present the reciprocal pairwise comparison matrices of the alternatives and the normalized priority vector for strength, security, and access. Once the pairwise comparison matrices of the criteria and of the alternatives by criteria have been determined, a table is presented with the results for the normalized priority vector by alternatives, the priority vector of the criteria, the global vector, and the ranking. In this other table is the result for the unit value of Castle N, while in this other table is the calculation of the total value for Castle N of 3,150,000 monetary units. Here is the comparative table of results for Case 1. Quality of the environment, quality of the building and state of conservation, and Case 2, strength, security, and access to the castles. As can be seen, Your Highness, there is a significant difference of 82.61% between the two cases, which is sufficient evidence to conclude that the results of the global vector of alternatives are not binding on market prices. Although the AHP is correctly applied, the mathematical artifice does not guarantee reliable real estate market values. "That's all," exclaimed the wise analytical. I now give way to the wise regressor to expound on his knowledge of the controversial procedure. From the opinion of the wise regressor, I agree with the position of the wise analytical, because scientifically they are two procedures that have very different and independent objectives and results. When using the comparative market method, the actual regulation indicates that two types of treatment can be performed, by factors and scientific. A treatment of a small sample is being applied that is not contained in the standard, so it is obvious that there is a non-compliance. As a conclusion, when applying the AHP with the valuation ratio, it is not possible to obtain market values because, as the wise analytic assured, the values of the global vector are not binding with the offered prices of the property due to the origin and the very nature of the information contained in the decision and estimation elements used in this procedure. For a greater empirical foundation on the non-convenience of using the AHP+RV in real estate valuation, I expose to you, with all due respect, Your Highness, an analogous situation considering econometric models, which must follow this procedure until reaching the economic model, and consequently, the econometric one. To generate the database, the table is presented with the identification of the explained variable, unit price, and the explanatory variables, considering all the variables of cases 1 and 2 already mentioned by the wise analytical and the land and construction areas of each comparable. Using the Excel random number generation function, the database was obtained for a sample of 69 data as shown in the following tables. Here is the equation of the multiple linear regression model and the mosaic of results obtained using the SysDia program. The results of the test statistics are presented in the table. Given these results, the MRLM is rendered invalid without the need to assess further basic assumptions or model specification errors. In this summary table is the result for the total value of the Castle N of 3,300,000 monetary units. This result obtained does not have a valid empirical basis, as was explained in the presentation of the MRLM calculations, as well as the one determined using the AHP+RV 3,150,000.00 MU. In spite of a percentage difference of plus 4.76% of the value using the MRLM with respect to the value using AHP+RV, it is a mere coincidence of results. Both are biased, thus proving that the results of the global vector of the criteria are not binding with the prices of the real estate market. Even if the AHP method is well applied, the valuation ratio as a mathematical artifice does not guarantee market real estate values. From the verification of the method of reductio ad absurdum, For the purposes of the conclusion on the reductio ad absurdum method, alternative hypothesis, contrary, is recalled. The results of the general weighting vector of the AHP are linked to real estate market prices. With the examples performed, we reached contradiction or absurd result. Therefore, the original hypothesis, the results of the general weighting vector of the AHP are not linked to real estate market prices, is proved to be true. Discussion and conclusion. Discussion. There is no doubt about the effectiveness of AHP in decision-making. But the valuers have the obligation to consult the original sources of knowledge, never accept a methodological procedure as valid. There is always a need to prove its empirical foundation because that is where the discovery of information enhances the investigation into the science of valuation. Conclusion. Based on the ad absurdum argumentative strategy and with the results of the investigation, it was demonstrated that the alternative hypothesis is false. Therefore, the results of the general weighting vector of the AHP are not linked to the prices of the real estate market. Therefore, the valuation ratio as a mathematical artifice does not guarantee market real estate values.